This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Have you heard about the 2018 study that showed half of prenatal vitamins tested had unacceptable levels of heavy metals? No? Well, now you have. I'm Kat, mother of 3 and founder of Ritual, the company making traceability the new standard in the supplement industry. I remember staring at my prenatal vitamins and finding all these things I was trying to avoid. High amounts of heavy metals, synthetic colorants, and unnecessary ingredients. So, at 4 months pregnant, I quit my job and started Ritual because I believe that all women deserve to know what they're putting in their bodies and why. I'm so proud of our prenatal vitamin. The ingredients are 100% traceable, it's third-party tested for microbes and heavy metals, and recently received the Purity Award from the Clean Label Project. You see, we trace like a mother because, let's be honest, no one cares quite like a mother. But don't just take my word for it. Trace for yourself with 25% off at ritual.com/prenatal.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, in the first of a whole new block, helping me to explore minute 21, which runs from approximately 20 minutes as Scully looks at a bearded Mulder through to 20 minutes 59 seconds as Father Joe asks Mulder about his expertise, is regular Xcast guest and first timer on I Want to Believe Minute, Russ Hugo. Welcome, Russ. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be able to chat about this oft maligned film. A complicated film. But yeah, thanks so much.
Absolutely. And we'll get a little bit into what you think of it in just a second. Yeah, because, you've been on the Xcast for many years now, and you've probably talked about I Want to Believe at some other point, but this is a whole other ball game, minute by minute. So we'll get there. But before we start, guys, very quick reminder at the start of this block to follow us on social media. You can follow me personally at Linktree, linktr.ee/AJ Blackwriter. You can follow the Xcast and all the social media channels it has at Linktree, linktr.ee/the Xcast, which is a new way of doing it. And if you're enjoying the show, please do drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It does help us. If you're not enjoying the show, please don't drop us a 1-star review, because some of you have. And that's just not cool, guys. So don't do it. Anyway, also, don't forget you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Xcast for early releases of episodes, lots of bonus content over the years. We've been doing this years, and much more. So, with that all said, Russ, I Want to Believe, let's get your story on it. When did you first see this movie?
This goes back to the early days of Netflix. Back when I first revisited anything that would be 1013, and I watched Millennium back in the early 2000s, and then after that I read a review, I think it was by Roger Ebert, about I Want to Believe, and it was an interesting review. It made me want to seek it out, and then I believe in the Millennium fandom, the film had a little bit more appreciation, even though I remember it kind of coming and going without much fanfare. So I rented the DVD and I watched it. Boy, I want to say probably 2 years after it came out, I think, around that time.
Okay, so that was, when would that be? 2010,
I think, probably.
10-ish, something like that.
My guess.
Yeah. So you didn't see it at the cinema then? You didn't
I
see
did not.
It at the movies?
No, yeah. Did you? I'm sure you've already answered this, but just for the sake of curiosity. Because I'm listening to this, this is my first time hearing anything on the I Want to Believe minutes, so breaking the illusion.
Yes, because we record out of order. Oh, the secret's out. But yes, I did go and see it, and as I recounted some minutes before, I didn't have the best time, if I'm not going to lie. I like it more now than I did then. But yes, I can vividly as I talked about, I can vividly remember, Russ. I can remember who I was with. I can remember the pub we went to afterwards. I can remember the cinema we went to. It's strange how these things, even like how many years now? 16, 17 years on, just still stick in your head. It was a different experience for me. But what do you think of it generally? I mean, if you were to give it a rating out of 10, roughly, what do you think of I Want to Believe as a whole, and what would you give it?
If anyone's heard me on the Xcast in the past, which I don't expect them to or have remembered, I generally rate things on a very fully distributed curve, meaning half the episodes would be below 5, and half of them would be above 5. For this, I would probably give it maybe a 7 and a 7.5, in the sense that I think overall it's aiming for something fairly reasonable when it comes to in scope, and it's getting fairly close to that. There are, as I'm sure other people have commented on, and I look forward to hear people's thoughts, there are some problematic issues with the film that I'm not going to defend or excuse. So there are some issues. There are some, even in that sense, I'm speaking more ethically and politically. There's also some clunky moments here or there. It's not flawless by any means, but there are, especially when you consider the turnaround time that was required and put on the crew and the writers. I think overall it does a lot of things surprisingly well. I particularly appreciate the atmosphere of the film. I like the soundtrack, the general mood, the settings that are established, the sets. I like the pacing. I'm sure other people commented on this, that it feels more like a Millennium episode or a movie than an X-Files one. But because they share a lot of, they share a lot of even just tone and general script writing. I mean, it's the same, a lot of the same folks worked on both things. But some of my favorite X-Files episodes would be Closure, Oubliette, Beyond the Sea. I like a lot of those Monster of the Week styles that are more melodrama and mystery like this. And so for me, of the two movies, I much prefer I Want to Believe. I totally understand why the majority of fans prefer Fight the Future. It's just what appeals to me for the X-Files. More of that is here, and I Want to Believe. And I think one of the stronger parts of it that I like is both the reinterpretation of the mythology in a mundane setting, but Scully's arc in particular in this movie. Just the fact that it's a smaller scale, they just allow that melodrama to come through. So that's my general.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's funny you should mention Oubliette and episodes like that, because in the run-up to I Want to Believe Minute, we re-aired discussions on Oubliette and Irresistible, actually.
Oh, wow.
In thinking of them as a kind of, not identical to I Want to Believe, but definitely in that wheelhouse of pre-millennium, millennium-ish X-File episodes. And Oubliette absolutely could be seen as one of those run-in sort of stories to I Want to Believe in various different ways. So, Paper Hearts as well, I suppose you could bracket in a similar vein. Yeah, melodrama is a really good way of putting a really good word for it, I think, which I don't think we've used that word a lot on this yet, actually, to describe it, but it absolutely fits, yeah. So I think you're right. I do actually think you're right. I think you're right to draw those connections as well.
If I may, can I ask what you rated it? And just I know we don't want to spend too much time because you've already said it, but like a 20-second pitch on your feeling, just so I'm curious where you stand at it now.
Well, I mean, I might end up contradicting myself because I can't remember what score I gave it back on the first episode or whatever it was. But I feel like I gave it something around the vein of a 7 now. Whereas when I first watched it, I think it would have been around a 4, to be honest, because I think it wasn't what I wanted at the time, and I don't think I really accepted it on its own terms back in 2008. And I think I think now, with the benefit of hindsight, I think I agree more with your take on it. Really, I think it is underrated a bit. I think it's got some really, really good things going. I think visually, thematically, storytelling wise. So I do love Fight the Future more because I'm much more a fan of like pulp escapism in that way. But yeah, this is a good film. This is a good film, and I'm hoping that the minutes so far, people are really starting to find that new appreciation of it or rediscover it. That's my hope.
Yeah, no arguments. And again, I think the context in which you saw it in a theater with the history of the X-Files and what's kind of expected in an X-Files film, I can really sympathize with the disappointment of what, or let's say the unmet expectations of this film, which really feels like a highly polished TV episode. So I want to be clear, I'm not going to go out and disparage anybody who doesn't connect with this film. There are a lot of reasons why I think people would be alienated from this film. And if people want to spend the time and look for what I think is a lot of good stuff in here, great. But yeah, no conflict on that front. Yeah,
totally. And we've got lots of varied opinions on it so far, which is fantastic. But let's barrel then into minute 21, shall we? And talk about where we pick up, which is a car journey, essentially. And we've got a couple of minutes here, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics in the next minute. But here, Mulder is travelling with Father Joe. Well, actually, just before he gets in the car, there's a tiny little exchange with Scully. This is the only time we see Scully in this block. It's the very end of their conversation outside of like Father Joe's, complex. And we get a full shot, and it will have been talked about extensively. I think I talked about it with Adam Chamberlain. But Mulder's beard is something else, isn't it, right now, here? It's a heck of a beard, Russ.
I think it works really well for the film. And I'm glad that the caster, or the costume and makeup folks, or whoever in the script, whoever decided they left it on this long in the film. I think some other films would have shaved it off after the gag. Like when he first gets in the helicopter or something, was when that would happen. And the fact that they've left it on, maybe for a metaphorical transition sense of how the character is growing back into the old role. But regardless, it's a good look. I think it works well. It's honestly kind of shocking later when it's removed. That I don't know. I missed the beard. It fit Mulder at this point in the movie, but I get why they did it. So no, I'm not gonna get in a fight with the past time traveling crew on this front. But that's one wish I would have had.
Well, it was I said it before. It was the beard of sadness, the beard of melancholy. He has to shave off the beard of melancholy in order to evolve back into Mulder. Into the Mulder threat. He goes back to the Mulder of old. So it's a necessary sacrifice, I'm afraid. But
it is. Aesthetically, it's a shame, though.
It is. I agree. So yeah, we have this final exchange with Scully. This actually was the scene, and Chris Carter talks about how this was the scene they filmed the night they had the fake werewolf head that Chris Carter had shot for publicity purposes. And I've talked about this previously, I think, or maybe in an episode to come, because we record out of order. But I don't know if you remember the publicity shot, Russ, of the werewolf head that made everyone think the film was... You do remember this? Yeah.
Yes.
And I was, everyone was convinced that it was about werewolves. And I am a bit disappointed that it wasn't about werewolves to this day, to be honest.
I'd go for that. Yeah, get Michael Horse back and redeem that character a little bit. In all honesty, I remember a lot of people being kind of upset about that, and I get the issue. But if you're going to fake something, I have to give them credit that they faked something that would signal to the audience that it's going to most likely be a monster of the week, and it's not going to be a myth arc story. So to give them credit, if you're going to do a distraction, and I understand that some of them regret doing that, they could have picked a worse thing.
It definitely, I think, worked back then as a piece of not quite viral marketing, and I suppose in a way, but it definitely worked to throw people off the scent. But I think it maybe worked too well. Then when this plot line came out, everyone went, "What?" As much as it's actually a more intriguing, Monster of the Week story than people gave it credit for. But there you go. But yeah, after this scene anyway, they're in the car traveling with Joe in West Virginia. Father Joe, Billy Connolly, Drummy and Whitney are both there in the car, and it's the beginning of an exposition scene. I thought it was interesting how Mulder is trying to distinguish himself in a different way to Joe from the FBI agents, who are both very suspicious of him, obviously, but he calls himself a non-cop, which is an interesting term. He's very much positioning himself not as an FBI agent here, but because he wants Joe to see him in a different light, I think.
There's that level of ambiguity when it comes to it throughout this entire film is one thing I really like about the film, and we can get into that a little bit more, of where nearly all of the threads are trying to maintain that balance of cognitive dissonance, I guess is the phrase I will use in that sense. But strangely, two of the more clear-eyed characters being both Drummy and Mulder, when it comes to, they're a little bit more straightforward in their relationships to some of the other characters. And yeah, interestingly enough, though, it still kind of dances a few times where I'm expecting Mulder's interactions with Joe to head more in the Luther Lee Boggs, Beyond the Sea kind of critique and skepticism. There are a couple of moments where I'm a little bit surprised, considering if you think about Mulder's past and when he's shown hostility and skepticism, it's generally either to psychics and or religious individuals, traditionally Western religious individuals. And here we have somebody that's merging both of that. And so coming to the movie after watching the show, that is one thing. Mulder can change. You can grow as a character. So I want to cut myself off a little bit there to say it's not contradictory to the character, but it's unexpected. So when rewatching the film recently, I keep waiting for that beat, for that shoe to drop. And so it is a little bit interesting. I think the non-cop does help lower the antagonistic stake to Mulder in the sense of Whitney is very high energy in the film and pushing things forward for the tension of we have to rescue this individual. Scully is distracted with the other person. Mulder's kind of in this limbo state, and where he is motivated to save people, but it doesn't have the same verve that Whitney might have, and so I think that it is more of that waking up stuff we were hinting at earlier with the beard. Mulder's kind of coming out of the space. He's not FBI. He's kind of a consultant. He's kind of not. So the non-cop statement, I think, works well to describe where he's at. That's a long answer to your good question, but I hope some of that's useful.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, I think that's the space he's in, because Whitney's full of that passion for this. She looks at him with disgust when Mulder gives him Bannon's, badge, and he can't place her, and she's she's just full of that disgust in the same way that Scully would always look at people like Luther Lee Boggs, with disgust whenever she had to go and see them, whereas Mulder was much more dispassionate in a way. He knew they were either evil or corrupt or vicious or whatever, but Scully she wore that on her sleeve so often, with people like John Lee Roach, her disgust was so visible. And Whitney shows that here in that way. So it is interesting the way he's positioned. And obviously Joe is wondering why Mulder is, as he says, the expert, the different guy. And I think we should come back and talk a bit more about that in the next minute, Russ. Because I think there's a bit more to chew into.
There definitely is. I'll just add really quick that it's very bright for 5 a.m. in winter in West Virginia. Because I could pick any time, so it's interesting that they did that time. But I guess it kind of makes sense in the previous scene being 1 a.m. that how much time would pass. But yeah, I found that a little cute. And the line Joe delivers here in this scene says, "I don't know this girl. this Agent Bannon of yours. That's one of the examples sometimes of the dialogue in this film. There's a lot of great dialogue and a lot of great delivery, but that one, and we'll be getting to it later in the scene, that in these following minutes, but that phrase there, it grates quite a bit for me, but if some of it, I guess, kind of fits the character of Joe, but the idea of this Agent Bannon of yours, I can go on a limb and guess that Carter wrote that. It has that, how do you say, kind of stiff, I'm not purple prose, but sometimes he can write things with a little more,
oh yeah,
maybe voiceover being spoken by people in real life.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair observation, definitely. You're probably right. Yeah, and maybe it is a little bit of a nod to the character, but also it might be, a little bit of that kind of writing. But yeah, this scene continues in minute 22. So Ross and I will be back very soon to cover that and delve a little bit more into I Want to Believe. So please do join us for that when we return for the next part of this block. But until then, always remember, trust no one.